thank you again for taking the time to listen. In this episode, I had a conversation with Matt Bogaard. Matt is the founder and CEO of Bogaard Group International. BGI is a global security consulting firm with clients that include the entertainment, video gaming, financial services, pharmaceutical, manufacturing, and retail industries around the world. Prior to starting this company, Matt spent 15 years in law enforcement, having served in a variety of assignments including investigations, training, recruiting, and media relations. In our conversation, he talks about knowing that he would not spend a full career in law enforcement. He knew when he started that was not where he would finish. In 2009, Matt transitioned into the private sector as the head of global security at DreamWorks Animation SKG, where he oversaw the security initiatives worldwide for the company. After 5 years there, he again knew he wanted a change. He believed through his own company he could do a better job of offering consulting services and started BGI in 2014. In our conversation, Matt provides some great information about cultivating a marketable social media presence, the importance of developing a network of business relationships, the private sector interview and hiring process, and some of the pitfalls to avoid when transitioning from law enforcement and the military into the private sector. I believe you will find Matt's insight beneficial. Episode 3 with Matt Bogaard. This is the Transition Drill Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Pantani, and I've been a police officer for 30 years. I'll be having interesting conversations with guests who are former first responders, military, or both, and who will explain their experiences with their transition. I cannot say this enough. Prepare today for your transition tomorrow. Regardless of the why, you're closing in on your retirement, you just want to do something different, or other circumstances have or are forcing your transition. I believe this podcast will be beneficial to you. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Let's get into this. The one thing I will ask you, though, so kind of doing a little stalking on you, about you online.
Yeah.
You've got IMDB credit for a movie. What was that about?
Several. When you're at DreamWorks, when you're an employee of DreamWorks, you get credit, you get listed in the credits. So like there's 5 or 6 movies that were produced while I was at DreamWorks, or 4 or 5 movies or TV shorts that I was a full-time employee. So I got listed in the credits. So at the very end, you can actually watch my name. You know, it just says like facilities and security or facilities and real estate or something like that.
So it's just kind of a block that they check, and whoever would be in your position gets put in there?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. There's no better story than that.
Oh, come on. You can make up something better. So going all the way back, where'd you grow up?
So born and raised in Pasadena, and most of my immediate family was all many of them still reside there, and always been sort of LA centric, both family and extended family.
Was your growing up, or is your family law enforcement related? Are you the first that was in law enforcement?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't have any ties whatsoever to law enforcement. During my childhood, I always was interested in either police work or being a firefighter. And I have a fear of heights, so that eliminated firefighting. And so it quickly leaned into law enforcement. And when it came time to sort of start making some decisions about my career, which is when I was in undergraduate school, I started looking around and getting really serious about what to do. But it was interesting because backlash is probably too strong of a word, but I had a few people in my family that were like, wait, what are you doing? Just because we just didn't have law enforcement in my background. My dad was in the military, and my parents are very supportive of police and all that stuff. But they just never pictured me doing it.
Was the backlash not from your parents then, from extended family?
Extended family, and my mom, just being mom, was worried about me in a position where you're wearing a bulletproof vest and carrying guns.
Concerned about her son's safety.
That's right. Yeah, pretty simplistic objective.
Now, you started down the college route right out of high school. Were you thinking about a different career prior, or were you just kind of taking up the gap between then when you were 21 to be able to become a police officer?
I was always planning to leave straight from high school and go to college. And my original plan and my passion, at least at that time, was, as I got through my undergraduate work, was federal law enforcement. And I always pictured myself, FBI, Secret Service, U.S. Marshal, that sort of thing. I'd read the books, I'd seen the movies. That all sounded very adventurous and very exciting and very non-desk-like. So a non-routine, which is what I was seeking at that time, was I didn't want to work behind a desk from 8 to 5. So my original pursuit was federal law enforcement. And then when I graduated from undergraduate and started talking to recruiters, I started taking a lot of the written tests. I met with the FBI, I met with the Secret Service, met with all of them. I realized a couple things. Number one, it was at a time in 1994 that's very, very competitive. There were not, that was before they had flooded a lot of money into law enforcement funding. And I realized that, I was for some of those organizations, I was an appealing candidate, but it could take a year or two to get hired in those into the federal ranks. And then I realized, wow, I could maybe get a job in the local law enforcement in 6 months, maybe a little bit less. And that was, a reasonable expectation. So that sort of changed my direction.
So it was more just the hiring time that took you to local law enforcement?
Yeah. And, I got sort of backed into it because my focus was all federal. And then I had a few family friends that said, why don't you come do a ride along? So I did ride alongs with 4 or 5 different agencies, large, small, medium, and got a different flavor. But I rode with a lot of police officers who were, wildly passionate about their work and really, really enjoyed it. And I went on a couple of ride-alongs in my hometown in Pasadena, where, in one there was a homicide and a suicide, like within the first 2 hours of me going on a ride-along. Even though they only have a handful of homicides a year, I happened to be on that night. And
just one of those lucky days.
Yeah. And I realized, wow, that's really exciting, really fun. You really get to be in the middle of things. So it was in part a practical, desire to get hired soon and be able to, move out of the house and pay my own way. But then some of it was the adventure and the adrenaline.
So what is your undergrad in?
Sociology, Bachelor of Arts of Sociology.
So you went towards a degree that would somewhat help you in law enforcement, but also give you an option of a fallback should you step away from law enforcement. And then what year did you start law enforcement?
I got hired in late 94, and I had an academy date of January 30th, 1995.
And then you end up spending how many years?
14.
In that time, when would you say you started thinking about leaving? When did kind of the luster start falling off?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So I would say that when I started, and even when I was in the academy, and you're going through all the routine and the rigor and the competitiveness and the the challenge of it, and the academy and all that process is super challenging. I never really pictured myself doing it for 30 years, not because I had any negative opinion or I didn't think it was for me, but rather I had so many different interests and such a wide variety of professional pursuits that I thought there's so many different things to do. I'm not sure if I want to do anything, however exciting and fun it might be and fulfilling. I don't think I want to do anything for 30 years. I want to move around and do different stuff. So I thought, well, I'll do 2 or 3 years, and then maybe I'll go to federal, or maybe I'll go to law school. And of course, being a criminal lawyer after going to the academy and working the streets as a police officer would be, hugely valuable. So I figure whatever I'm doing is heading me in a good direction. More schooling, federal ranks, some other private job. So I knew it was steps in the right direction. I just didn't expect myself to stay there for 14 years.
So going in, you already were kind of geared towards this is temporary. I'm going to be moving on to something else. Don't necessarily know what, but you were not in that mindset of this is going to be the rest of my career, so to speak.
That's right. That's right. And like I said, I think 14 years was even longer than I would have expected. If you had asked me when I went to the academy, I would have said, oh, 2, 3, 4 years, something like that, see how it goes. But I was true to my word in that I told myself when I started, if it's fun and I'm enjoying it, I'm going to play it out and enjoy it. That did happen as I got into different assignments and did different things in my job, and it was very fulfilling. So I had no plans to change, and I changed my idea of going to the federal ranks just because I didn't want to move out of LA, and I had a pretty good quality of life.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you ever followed back and circled back on trying to apply at the federal level once you became a cop.
I never actually did. Had lots of, pretty quickly in year 3, I think I became a detective. And so, of course, as a detective and doing investigations, you're always going to be working outside the city borders, which means you're also going to be working with other agencies, other organizations, other government or entities. So I immediately was, exposed to the FBI in particular, a little bit with Secret Service and Marshal Service. Even then, although I was still interested and passionate about some of the things the federal officers were doing, I looked at kind of a cost-benefit analysis of, my quality of life, my commute, my salary, my pension, all those how did that weigh in versus, maybe getting placed in some random large city around the United States and taking a pay cut and working a lot more hours. I was working the 3/12 work week at that time. So it was just a cost-benefit analysis of like, I'm happy in my career, I'm not going to change. So I never did apply.
And also on top of that, you deal with the potential of relocating repeatedly with a federal law enforcement agency. So I would imagine that doesn't work. I don't want to say it doesn't work. It impacts a family life, especially once kids come into the picture.
That's right. And, pretty quickly I had, little kids in the picture. And so, that concept wasn't appealing, and staying local, and my, like as I mentioned, my, family, my parents are still local and all that stuff. So I wasn't excited to move around the country.
So when you saw your exit coming from law enforcement, how soon, I know you said you went in with it with the mindset that this wasn't going to be your career, but when you actually made the decision to, okay, I'm going to step away from law enforcement, how long did that process take?
Yeah, and I think, folks should be patient in that regard because it probably never goes as fast as people want. I would say from when I first made the decision that, hey, I think I want to do something else, I think there's something else out there for me in the next chapter of my career, I would say every bit of 18 months and maybe 2 years. And so I think it's important. It was important for me to do it at a time when I wasn't desperate or urgent, to make a change. That I was still competing for promotions. I was still working, my tail off, doing the best I could, and staying keeping my eye on the ball, so to speak, at my current organization. So I was, giving it my all, and I knew it could take 1 to 3 years to really find the right fit. I wasn't going to go anywhere, and I was offered a couple of positions that I declined because they didn't fit for me. And so, yeah, I think it was a year and a half to 18 to 24 months is what it took me to really find the job. Now, I ultimately found the perfect role for me, but it takes time.
When you talk about you had 2 to 3 offers that you bypassed because they didn't work for you, were you actively looking for these positions, or did they just come to you by happenstance?
Actively looking, yeah. The way that I approached it, and there was a tendency on my part as well as many others to think, well, what else can I do? Do I have skills that in law enforcement are transferable? Of course, they're transferable to a career in security in some capacity, or protection, or something like that, or corporate security. But are there other things one might be able to leverage in other careers? And so I knew that my approach was meet with as many people as I possibly could meet, not just towards security, but any career at all. So I had actually opened my mind up to go work at a bank, to go work in financial management, be a financial advisor. I mean, I was all over the gamut to see, I ran the gamut of what to do and what might be interesting and fulfilling for me.
Did you have a background in finance?
No, but I had friends that worked in finance and in banking, and who both of these people who had offered positions to me said, you know, I don't really need you to have a background in finance. I don't need you to be an expert coming in the door. We can train you up on this stuff. The value you bring is a particular personality, a particular disposition, and a network of people that you know that adds value, and we can get you certifications later. We can get you trained later. We can figure out, you can learn banking, if you will, on the job if you're working in business development. And that was a role that I was offered, was a business development role for a startup bank. And the CEO said, I can train you up on that. I can't train you on business development skills, but I can train you on banking, and you come in with business development skills.
So one of the things that you bring up, which I really think is important, and having been in law enforcement before, I'm sure you can relate to this. There are those officers who make being a cop their whole identity. And when that gets taken away, it's twofold. One, you deal with the issues of losing your perceived identity. But two, if you don't have that broad reach of your own personal network, you're limited on your job options. Was that something that you made the conscious effort to keep yourself, I want to say, grounded by having a variety in your social circle, or was that just how you naturally are?
Probably it's a mix. It's probably yes to both of your alternatives. I think part of it was conscious that because of me entering a career that I did not have a ton of ties to or family background to, just naturally, I still had a lot of friends outside of law enforcement, and some of my closest childhood friends, none of whom were in law enforcement, and I maintained relationships with them. So some of it was just a function of that I didn't have a whole family history or family tradition for that career. So that's part of that. And then the second part is, I think I, did in some sense, and they train you up on some of this in the academy, is to keep kind of a good work-life balance and keep a good perspective, so that especially in the really, really busy cities, it's easy to get very negative when you see such tragedy and challenging things occur. But to sort of keep yourself grounded, as you mentioned, with non-law enforcement relationships and non-law enforcement networking. So it was a mix of how I was when I came in the door, and also trying to keep myself psychologically healthy.
It's that whole developing that insulated, it's very easy to do in a profession where you're dealing with so much negativity that the people you work with all the time tend to build on that negative behavior. And you really got to, and why I'm bringing this up is because transitioning away from this career, it's, from what I've learned in speaking to others, is it's very important not to bring all of that career with you. So you mentioned the bank, going into the banking industry. You bring certain aspects, but they're not looking for you to bring the negative aspect to it. And so developing that social circle or maintaining that social circle outside of law enforcement is paramount. Along those same lines, though, when you started to make your change, I would imagine there had to have been some apprehension, because at almost 15 years in, you get that established comfort of, hey, I've got a guaranteed job here. From a family aspect, any issues with your family and like, whoa, wait a minute, what are you talking about? You're walking away from this career.
Yeah, it was. My wife at the time was very supportive of me looking around. She knew that we were going to incur some level of risk, career risk, by me and risk to stability by leaving a job where I was, very well liked, had no issues, no problems, was, well known in the community, knew the city council well, had lots of ties to the city. Was on promotional lists, had been successful promoting, all that stuff, a 3% at 50 pension, locked in, all that stuff. So leaving that stability was a stress for me. My wife, on the other hand, was more sort of visionary. I give her credit for it. She was a little bit more visionary and said, all that's true, and I see why I can sympathize with you being stressed about it, and yeah, it creates some stress for me as well. But I think that for your own career fulfillment and your own career goals and objectives, and you're experiencing some level of boredom or lack of learning, lack of stimulation, professional stimulation, that you should give it a try and see. So there's definitely some risk, but and you have to be willing to accept that risk to make the change, because you are leaving a very stable, smooth sailing opportunity out into the abyss where you're not quite sure when you're leaving to be an at-will employee at your next organization, most likely.
Right. So then it's time to make the change. You had been given some offers in the banking industry and other industries, I'm assuming. What was your focus, though? So you're ready to make the change. What was your focus? What were you looking to go to?
I wanted to, work for a larger organization that had more challenge, more scope of work, more complicated challenges to manage. Not necessarily that you don't have lots of complicated things to manage or you don't have challenging tasks and responsibilities in a law enforcement career, but I thought I could leverage a lot of the things, some of those challenges, but just go down a different path that would create new challenges for me. And I thought, I wanted to do something that would allow me more growth, more career growth, and even some global, doing global travel, doing international related risk work or security work in some way, and pursuing some of those interests.
Had you already established a ancillary network of people that you could reach out to in those fields, or did you also have to start developing that aspect when you decided to kind of make your jump?
I think I was developing it. I had some folks in the existing network, but not a ton. And it was more of leveraging some of those to get additional referrals and get second and third and fourth tier, removed meetings, and whether it was a coffee or a lunch or whatever it may be, to meet more people and learn about their careers. And people, I found on the networking side, or when you're trying to build your network, when people understand the context of your reason for wanting to meet with them, and when you just tell people, hey, I'd love to hear about your career, what do you love, and ask lots of really fun, open-ended questions, most people, especially that are happy in their career, they love those meetings. So there wasn't a lot of resistance to be like, oh yeah, I'll grab a Starbucks with you, that sounds good. And then I would just start with, tell me about your career, like how'd you get here and what do you like? And
And what year is this are we talking about?
This was, I first started looking 2007, 2008, and then I made the change and leaving government to the private sector in 2009, March of 2009.
So looking back on it, LinkedIn isn't a huge a platform as it is today. I don't even know if LinkedIn was in place in that time. As far as reaching out to make those connections, was it literally just a cold call to a company?
Yeah, I think, we were using, maybe LinkedIn was early on, but not, like you said, if it was around, I don't think it was sort of mainstream yet. So there may have been maybe LinkedIn, but I think it was more dependent on company websites and jobs postings that I would just see in the organic way of just, looking around and sourcing the internet for positions. And then if someone, being in LA, I had a couple of family friends that worked at Disney. So then I would, I'd start there and I'd say, hey, do you know people that work in corporate security at Disney? And I'd say, oh yeah, I know so-and-so. Why don't you meet with him? And then you meet with him and he has a friend that works at Paramount. And so, we just kind of go from there. Right?
So then how many well, you ultimately left and went to DreamWorks, correct? Was your first jump out of law enforcement. How many companies did you apply and interview with? I refer to it as testing, but that's that law enforcement mentality. I don't necessarily know if it's a testing more as an interviewing.
Yeah, it is more interviewing probably, and I understand the distinction. I probably applied and interviewed for maybe 7 or 8 positions before the DreamWorks one surfaced.
But all of them in a corporate security type role?
Yeah, manager of investigations, or manager of corporate security, or director of security operations, those types of roles.
For the ones that you didn't get, was there something lacking that you could have done in preparation ahead of time to have made you a better candidate for those spots, or were they just not your fit to where you didn't take the job?
I think they were more the former. I think there were a lot of them that I just wasn't super qualified for yet, and it's this sort of catch-22, because a lot of those corporations, especially the big ones, I remember a job I applied for at Universal Studios. It was before they had a bunch of mergers and acquisitions, but it was the Universal Studios company. And I had applied like a manager of investigations, and I think on paper I was quite qualified, but I ultimately found out they were really looking for someone that had corporate experience. But it's this standard predicament. How do you, if you don't have corporate experience, but you can't get a corporate job without corporate experience, how do you get there from here?
Right.
So which ultimately means you have to find an organization where you develop a connection and a rapport with them, where they say, even though this person doesn't have corporate experience, we're confident based on the basic skills and the essential background that he or she has, that we think he can perform. But making the first step is often the hardest one, because once you've done a year or two in corporate, number one, all the roles already, because now you're on the inside. So now you're learning about all these positions before they're hitting LinkedIn. But now you sort of know the process. And then once you already have experience working at DreamWorks or NBC or going to work at whatever company, fill in the blank, now you're much more marketable. It's like, oh, he's done 2 years, for NBC. He's done 2 years for Disney. Oh, he's done 2 years for Snap. Oh, he's worked for Netflix for a year. He knows what he's doing.
It's nothing overly significant, but it's just the being able to check the box of having prior experience. So one of the things that I've learned from talking to several people is did you use a professional resume writer, or were you able to get through that process on your own? Because I'm hearing from quite a few people that it's very important to tailor that resume to the position you're looking for. And if you can't get it on your own, to really use a professional service. Did you go that route?
I never used a professional service, but I certainly did adjust and modify a resume based on the role I was applying for. You have to put down the facts, and you have to be truthful, and you have to be genuine in what you're on the content, but you can certainly shape it, especially with a 14-year career in law enforcement. There was, even for a smaller agency like I worked for, I still had a long list of flavors and options that I could put in the resume or leave out. And the question is, what do you put in that spurs interest on the other side, where they see some bullet point that, oh, wow, he used to do, financial fraud. Well, this is, we're a bank. So this is, the fact that he used to work financial fraud, and, then there's a link, right? So you need to make sure and find that connection, so that that person on the other side, who's only going to spend 30 seconds or 45 seconds on your resume, is able to connect the dots and say he has the experience, he can deliver. So I didn't use a service, but I did tailor it to what the job was looking for.
And going through those initial processes, for somebody who's potentially going to be in that interview process, what are some of the advice pieces that you would recommend that will kind of help them along through that process?
I think, a couple things come to mind. Number one, certainly avoid, any use of, the government's famous, and government agencies are famous, especially the federal agencies are famous for acronyms and, different industry jargon and terminology. Avoid all of that. So, spell out all of the, other than the obvious ones like LAPD or FBI or CIA, those types, everything below that, you shouldn't use an acronym or use internal jargon, because many of the hiring managers and certainly the recruiting screeners early on in the process, when you apply to a larger corporation, you're going to have multiple levels before you get to the hiring manager. They don't know most of that terminology. So you don't want to lose someone early on in the process. You don't want to disqualify yourself prematurely by sort of boxing yourself out by using internal jargon and industry jargon that's not known. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is to help the hiring manager or the interviewer understand how your skills are much more broad. A lot of times there's a bias on the part of recruiting teams and hiring managers and HR professionals that police officers have this sort of narrow skill set. And while you know that that's not the case as the interviewee, as the candidate, and you're confident you have lots of skills that are transferable, you can't take for granted that the other side is gonna figure all that out. So you need to help them through that in a thoughtful way, so that they know that, you worked investigations for 8 years, and during your 8 years you did boom, 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 and you rattle it off. Then they start to see, like, oh, well, he did investigations and he did protection and he has like a little bit of work in international travel security. I never would have thought that. And you can open their mind up. So helping them to see that your skill set is more broad than they may perceive helps them get over that bias. So that's sort of the second piece. And I think the third, I'll close with this part on this question, is making sure that you convey a level of adaptability and flexibility and an open-minded approach. There is often a bias on the part of some corporations, again, especially those that are not former government or not former law enforcement, where they perceive those coming out of the government or military or police because of part and parcel of the work that they've done in their career, that they tend to be very structured, maybe rigid, maybe even closed-minded. And so, to immediately sort of dismantle that and neutralize that concern up front, to explain that, there's so much out there that you can offer, you don't think you have all the answers, give them some clues that they realize that's not the way that you are, and that you're more open. So I think avoiding the jargon, helping them to understand that your skill sets are more broad, and that your experience is more broad than they may think, and then sort of cautioning them that no, you're actually very adaptable and very flexible, and that's part of your personality. Those three things will go a really long way.
So how important today is it to build that LinkedIn profile as opposed to 5-6 years ago? Is that something somebody, in addition to a quality resume, should they be building that presence?
For sure. Yeah. And I think as the years have gone on, it was probably less essential back in 07, 08, 09 when I was making this change. And even, years after I started at DreamWorks, it was, probably still wasn't as, as important. But in today's times, look at, the virtual world and the hybrid office model as a result of COVID-19. You look at the increased globalization around the world in terms of the economy and leveraging a workforce that's no longer in the office. The remote workforce is here to stay, regardless of COVID or any other crisis like that. And so all that lends itself to a heavier dependence on technology, which means many candidates are going to be considered on, a lot of what's their online profile, what's their persona, what is LinkedIn, how do they present themselves on LinkedIn. And many of the same suggestions that I talked about in terms of interviewing with a corporation can be applied to LinkedIn. You don't want to have acronyms and list certifications that you have without defining what those certifications are for and why they're valuable. as opposed to just saying, oh, I have a CPP from as is and blah, blah, blah. That doesn't mean anything to a lot of these people. So anyway, the simple answer is I think LinkedIn is an extremely important piece of making the transition, and it's only going to get more important in the future.
Along those same lines, using the background analogy for law enforcement, how extensive do they go into a person's social media presence in companies looking to hire today?
There, it's a complicated answer because there are some state laws. Of course, they vary state to state, but there's variation in what corporations are allowed to do with regard to social media, scrubbing and social media assessments for candidates. That aside, because I think that's just a fact that there are some limitations, but from the candidate's perspective, I wouldn't get too hung up on what legal limitations there may or may not be. My focus would be, avoid the use of social media in a way that could be adverse to hiring. And there's, whether it's legal or not, or whether it's a common practice or not, and whether they should be looking at social media or not, let's leave those questions out. The fact is, your persona that you present on social media can definitely help or hurt you.
So it's something that you need to work as a group effort. Don't try to have this overly professional looking LinkedIn page and then your Instagram page is, booze and partying all the time, or whatever could be construed as a negative image for their company.
That's right. And, as we all know, there are different ways to get access to social media, even if your, account is private and your account's closed and all that, restricted, I should say. There's still, lots of ways to discover things about people. And so I would be very thoughtful and very cautious. It doesn't mean it doesn't mean you can't be on social media. It doesn't mean you can't use it, but you should use it at your own caution, because it in a way it could be used against you from a career perspective.
So law enforcement is in a unique stage right now. It's not the most popular profession. Are you seeing that there is already kind of a more negative bias that police officers are going to have to overcome coming into the corporate world?
Yeah, I would say, over the last 24 months, a lot of things have transpired that have probably put a little bit more pressure on that topic. Prior to the last 24 months, I think there were still some organizations back then that had concerns or reticence about law enforcement coming into the private sector. And take, for example, a good example, one of the clients one of my longest standing clients is a video game company, and they're very international. One of the more international organizations I know of. People all over the world, 30 offices around the world in lots of different countries, lots of different cultures, lots of different languages are spoken, lots of different, life choices, all mixed together in this video game company. And in a lot of ways, it makes it really fun and really interesting to work, a place to work. But if you look at it from the shoes, if you think about the fact that, some of the folks in that organization came from countries where law enforcement are very corrupt, where they have taken over the government, where they have done all these extreme things that we're not really as familiar with and used to here in the United States. So that you can kind of see their side a little bit if you're from a country where law enforcement are just known for being corrupt and being paid off, and now they're working at an American company. The concept of bringing leaders into the organization who are going to lead the country in risk policy and global security gives them reticence, and that's fair.
And that's going to come from good intelligence gathering on the company you're looking to apply for. What kind of, for no other term, what kind of mindset their executive body might be leaning towards. Because, like you said, if it's a company that's based outside the United States and what they know of their country's law enforcement, it may be very hard for them to separate American law enforcement. And so you have to be mindful of that.
That's right. That's right. And it doesn't mean that these jobs, just to sort of smooth out our discussion, it doesn't mean that there won't be opportunities for law enforcement officers to go work in private companies. But it is a nuance that has become particularly amplified in the last 24 months that should be considered in one's research methods, and be, not dismiss it as being unimportant. It is important, but it doesn't. But keep sort of stay in the middle of the argument. It doesn't mean there's no jobs out there because you're coming from law enforcement and no one will hire you. That's one extreme, and the other extreme is people are oblivious. If you're good, you're good. Who cares what career you're coming from? And that's not true either. So you have to be alert, be aware, and find an organization where you think you're really going to fit from a cultural and a professional perspective. And like any job, organization X may be perfect for you, and organization X may not be great for me, or vice versa.
And the other aspect of interviewing. So coming from that law enforcement background, very staunch suit and tie, you kind of get into that mentality, but that's not necessarily what corporate America is these days. You mentioned having tested or interviewed in the banking industry. I would imagine even the banking industry might not be as staunch as it used to be. Are you finding that you don't want to come in with this overly old persona in the sense of the suit and tie, is that still something that you find in corporate America?
Yeah, it has evolved over time, and I think the way to look at it is try to sort of do your best as best you can through your efforts and research and talking with people in the organization. Maybe a couple people that already work at this company, to sort of mirror the appropriate dress and understand the culture and the vibe at that organization when you interview. There is definitely risk. The way I grew up with the sort of old-fashioned values, you can't go wrong by being overdressed. That will never,
But that actually
negative.
can.
It can in today's times, I think. And because you could be a little out of touch, and they may feel like maybe you're not the best fit because you don't understand their culture. And it could go in either extreme, right? If it's the banking industry and you show up in, ripped jeans and a t-shirt, that's not going to go well. And then reverse if it's, an entertainment company or a brand new tech company, and you show up in a full-blown suit, you're thinking, hey, I'm showing I'm professional, I'm committed, it's fitted, I look nice, it's an expensive suit. What could go wrong? Well, they're trying to picture you in their organization, and you want to help them be able to see how you might fit right during that interview, and that suit could turn them off.
The process of interviewing, is it multiple single person interviews, or is it ever panel type interviewing?
Yeah, most of the interviews that you'll experience would be one-on-one. The panel interviews that we're all accustomed to from our days in law enforcement, both pre-employment, academy hiring, and promotional. There's always 3, 4, sometimes 5 people in the room, peppering you with questions. That's I've not heard of that really happening in the private sector. It generally would be one-on-one interviews, 40 minutes to 50 minutes, maybe an hour, not much longer than that. Some interviews might only be 30 minutes. And depending on and I think there's a clear correlation on the number of meetings or interviews you may be required to attend, is commensurate with the title and the salary and the role. If it's an entry level kind of, junior manager of security investigations, for a smaller company, you could probably get the job with 2 interviews, right? You have maybe one initial, one hiring manager, and then you get the job, or you don't. When I went to the DreamWorks job, where it was the top level security, the chief security officer for DreamWorks, it was, 4 months of, 9 or 10 interviews with all the execs of the company, very rigorous, and took a long time and a pretty stressful process. But they were all one-on-one interviews, no panels.
Do they kind of look for you to be, I don't want to call it informal, but are they looking to just more have a conversation with you, or is there some sense of pressure to it?
They tend to be very conversational. I heard these nightmare stories of when people were telling me about things I may experience in going into these private sector interviews, where they would, ask these crazy brain teaser questions and try to stump you with sort of trick questions that had, that or really put pressure on you and make you sweat. I didn't have any of that in my experience. You just meet with highly accomplished, highly educated, very, very sophisticated folks that are asking you tough questions about the job. They're not trying to trip you up. They're not trying to make you sweat. They want to know, are you prepared to deliver? And some of these initiatives that when we're talking about security, think about international travel security or business continuity planning or resilience or emergency communications during a crisis. Those are all things that, literally people's lives depend on your performance. So it's only natural and understandable that they are going to, they're going to really want to dig into that. But it's not for any artificial or superficial means just to pressure you or to run you through the ringer. They want to know, do you have the personality? Do you have the skills? Can you deliver? And do you have the right temperament for this sort of role? And temperament's huge in law enforcement or in the corporate security world, because they want you to be in the room to calm everyone down when the plane goes down or the building's burning or whatever the fill in the blank of the crisis.
You bring up a good point about education. So you have a very advanced degree in that you have your doctorate. Did you have your master's when you left law enforcement?
I had my master's at the time, and when I first started at DreamWorks, I had just started my PhD program.
How important did you find that having education was to the hiring side, and going towards your doctorate, did that also benefit you, or would that have not have been a teetering factor?
I think in the case of DreamWorks and my hiring manager, who, to this day is a close friend of mine, I think it mattered a lot. And I think it was very relevant to that I had the master's degree coming in. And when I had, told him when I first started that I was, in the midst of starting this doctorate, this PhD program, I think it definitely helped. Now, at that time, I had already been hired, but the master's was relevant to him, and it's not. I don't, from my interpretation of what he said it wasn't the education necessarily on its face, but it was that this was another set of skills. It showed discipline. It showed structure in my life. It showed a commitment to my career. It reflects other things than just saying, oh, I have a master's degree. I learned about these things and I took 60 credits or whatever it is.
Right.
It tells more about a person's background.
Going into that education process, though, do you think most companies will work with you if you're planning to further your education?
Yes, I definitely think so. And I think they're generally supportive of it. And at our current company, we have several of the folks who are in the midst of part-time education or part-time advanced degrees. And I'm very supportive of that for all the reasons I just mentioned. So yeah, I think generally there's support for that, and they like to see, again, not just the tactical skills that you're learning that you could apply to the job that you're learning today, you can apply tomorrow, but you're showing a commitment to your career and a focus on personal growth, that's a great quality, when people exhibit that.
You segued nicely into our company, and I want to get into your own company and that change, but I want to go back just one quick question. In that, most people coming from the military, coming from law enforcement, if they've gone that 20 or 30-year career, they're looking for those companies that are maybe going to embrace that long-term, aspect. Are companies looking for you to stay stable and stay there for many years, or is kind of the rapid movement more common and expected?
The movement and the career mobility and the employees' flexibility is definitely, if that's what carries the day now. That's completely acceptable. It's pretty much the new normal. And I have one friend that works in the industry who I think he's changed, and this has been helpful for me from a business owner and consulting perspective, because he's moved to 5 different companies over the course of 10 or 12 years. And I don't think it's harmed him at all. And I think people just expect us with startups and new firms and new technology and this company going in an IPO, and this company is growing, or they acquired that company, company X acquires company Y, they hired more people. I think it's kind of the norm. And in my parents' generation, this concept of switching companies 5, 6, 7 times was unheard of.
30 years and a gold watch.
Yeah, that's right. And today, moving 2, 3, 4 a year, every 2, 3, 4 years is completely normal.
From the flip side, though, could you have stayed at DreamWorks till you decided it was time to retire, or do you think they would have made you move?
That all depends on the company. I think you probably would see both answers if I made it more general. To answer your question specifically, I could have stayed there probably for 10, 15, 20 years. I mean, after I'd been there a few years and developed the relationships with the key people, I probably could have, finished out another 10, 15 years. I probably could have run out the rest of my career and just done my job and worked hard and, went home at 5:15 every day and led a pretty stable, comfortable life. Not all companies are like that, but I had developed a good relationship there, and it's a company that has that level of stability and commitment to the people. And I know close friends of mine who are still there to this day, long after I left.
And you did 2 years there?
I did 5.
5 years. So along the same lines of back when you started law enforcement, you went in kind of with the mindset that maybe you weren't going to be staying there long term. Was that already in the back of your mindset?
That one I kind of gave myself, in my head, I sort of envisioned 5 to 8 years, because I thought, hey, this is a very well-known company, a really positive brand. They're not involved in anything controversial. Movies are not going to go away. The entertainment industry is established in Los Angeles, or established in the world, but especially in LA, given Hollywood, proximity to Hollywood. I thought, 5 to 8 years, but to my point earlier, once I've been there at least a couple of years, I knew that would create flexibility. So if something happened to DreamWorks, God forbid, or they got acquired, which as it turned out they later did, but if they got acquired, or maybe my boss got fired and the new person came in and wanted to bring in his own people and I would lose my job, I knew as long as I had 2 or 3 years under my belt, I would be marketable to another entertainment company. But you could definitely make a long career in some of these organizations.
So now making the even bigger jump, it's the first jump leaving a very guaranteed career in law enforcement, the government job. You're pretty much solid. It's almost kind of weird how as the economy goes down, the security and government jobs goes up. You left that, you made the venture into corporate America, gave up some stability, some security. 5 years into it, you've now made the jump even greater of less stability by starting your own company. What was that like?
It was pretty stressful. When I was toying with the idea, trying to do the quick math here, let's see. So we're an 8-year, 7.5 year company. So I had daughters at 9 and 12. And they were both in private school, private independent schools with a healthy tuition for each of them. I was at USC, albeit part-time, but USC is not inexpensive either.
Sounds like a perfect time
Yes.
to start your own company.
My wife was at home, so we did not have the dual income. So yes, it was very stressful. And I think, fortunately my daughters were fine with whatever we chose. They were, as young as they were. My wife was super supportive, and she saw that although I was treated well at DreamWorks and I loved the organization, and working in the entertainment industry is a lot of fun for lots of reasons. So nothing but amazing things to say about DreamWorks, but she again saw some of the signs where I was sort of like not as fulfilled anymore. I wasn't as challenged work-wise. I wasn't as happy about going to work as I once was when I first started. And I, came to a realization about myself that, in order for me to really be satisfied professionally and, professionally stimulated, really challenged, long term, I needed to have multiple jobs, multiple careers, or, multiple clients in order to sort of hedge my boredom problem. And so it was stressful to launch the company, but I knew that it was the right path because it was going to it was going to keep me engaged and interested through good times and bad, because I was going to have different clients, and they're going to be in different industries, and I'm going to have different relationships with each of those clients, and I'm going to be doing different tasks and different projects for them. And it would be a great variety, and it would help me stay interested and engaged.
So not to overly simplify it, basically you were looking for that job that gave you that new big fire for the day. Kind of deal with this problem. It may not rear its head again for another 2 or 3 months, but company B is going to have a different problem tomorrow.
That's right. Yeah. When you add more clients into the mix, you add more excitement, more challenge, more strange calls, more crises to manage, more emergency communication. And when you're in a career related to security and risk and safety and all those things and continuity, that's what you want. If I were looking for a 8 to 5, do nothing, look at a computer screen, type things into a keyboard, that's a different career.
So we've now delved into your company. You can go ahead and plug the name.
Yeah, Bogaard Group International.
As a title for what your company does, you're a consulting company, correct?
Yeah, we're a consulting and advisory services company. We're about 75 people strong. We're coming up on 8 years. February of 2022 will be our 8-year anniversary. We've grown every year, and I like to define sort of what consulting and advisory means versus any other security company, because security companies are a dime a dozen. There's lots of them out there.
I think you're reading my script, because that was going to be my next question, but I'll let you finish explaining it.
Yeah. So it's what we do is we think of ourselves as a partner with our clients. So we don't sell software. We don't sell them security cameras. We don't sell them card readers or motion sensors or any other security equipment or infrastructure. We sell them essentially advice and partnership and collaboration. So we work really well when an organization maybe is too small to have a chief security officer. One of us sort of plays the role as the senior lead, as a senior security leader for that organization in a contractor way. So that's one scenario. We also can work with an organization like, Amazon or Sony or Netflix, where they have existing staff that have very similar expertise to myself and my top consultants. In fact, some of them may even have stronger credentials than some of my consultants do, but that's not really a problem. They're looking to create sort of additional bandwidth, to create additional just more bandwidth and capabilities to get more accomplished. And so the chief security officer or director of security or the head of global security, whatever that title may be, or the head of human resources or the head of real estate would bring Bogaard Group in. We call ourselves BGI to make it simpler. Would bring BGI in to collaborate with them and help them and advise. And again, there's no incentive for us to be fear-mongering or to, raise fear so that, oh my gosh, we need 250 cameras. Can you bring us cameras? It's like, no, we don't sell cameras. We may show you how many you need or where they should be placed, but how you decide to buy them or install them is really up to you. And we can help with that, but that's not really what we do. We're the ones that would say you need cameras and you need 22 of them, not 120, and that sort of thing. So that's how we are different than most firms, that we are agnostic. We're a product agnostic, and we simply are a service or organization that provides consulting and advisory to help people look at risk in a more practical way.
How easy was it for you to come to that business model when you decided to start the company? Was it something that was very apparent to you, or did you feel like you were kind of operating outside of the normal box?
I definitely was operating outside of the normal box, but with my 5 years at DreamWorks, I was on the other side of that conversation. So I was looking at proposals, and I was looking and listening to pitches from other security consulting firms at that time as the client. And so I was able to read, dozens, if not hundreds of proposals to see how they're worded. What are the hourly rates? What do consultants do? How much do they charge? Do they charge by hour or by project? And do you charge for travel time? And I was learning all this on the DreamWorks side, and all the while making notes like, this could be done better. This could be done cheaper. This could be done more effectively. This could be done with more credibility. This could be done in a more genuine way. So all the years I was at DreamWorks, and it goes back to your earlier question, like were you, what was your timeline? How long did you think you were going to stay at DreamWorks? I wasn't really sure how long I would stay at DreamWorks, but all the while I was building my idea for BGI. And whether that was in year 3 or year 10, I hadn't really figured it out yet. But I knew that I was creating a model and a business model. I never wrote a business plan. Everyone thought I probably should have. Hasn't harmed me yet that I know of. But I was building a business plan in my head.
So you were able to start this company without writing a business model?
Yeah.
Good on you.
So, but I thought there would be a better way to do it, and I wanted to take what I call sort of old-fashioned values that I learned from my parents, who are both in their 80s, so they grew up in a different generation, and apply that to consulting, and I saw all the things that these other firms did, and I thought, I can do better than that. I can, bring the hourly rates down. I can be more efficient in the way we deliver. I can do this better. I can, instead of a 30-page proposal, I think we can do this in 3 pages. I don't know why we need a 30-page, So I was asking these questions in my head and realizing I can create a better model. But it was, to close out the response and to go back to your original question, yeah, it was a little unusual. And there's not a ton of firms that are like us out there. There are lots of security firms. There are lots of former police running security companies. Very few are like what we do.
Is the basis of your company, though, still largely security focused? Or have you ventured out into other areas that you provide consulting service for?
It's primarily security. And, we help organizations do security design. Maybe they're going to, build a new campus in Costa Mesa, and they need a security company to help identify the right fencing and the right footings and the right lighting and all that stuff. So yeah, we do that. And say again your question. I lost track of your question when I started talking about security design.
Just have you branched out and do more than just security?
Yes, thank you. We have, because of my experience doing some work in facilities and real estate when I was at DreamWorks, a portion of my time, I don't think I'd mentioned it yet, but I was head of facilities and real estate. So I have some experience in lease management and facilities management. So we do have one client where we have an embedded team of 18 employees who do facility operations. So they have nothing to do with security, but they do desk moves and reception and different company related stuff, operational day-to-day stuff that has nothing to do with security or safety or risk. So the simple answer is we've branched out a little bit, but we're very cautious to branch out too far into areas that we are really not experts in. Now, I feel good about facility operations because of my background, my personal background, but we've been asked and approached from other companies or other clients from time to time to branch out even further. And we've generally declined to do that because I'm not comfortable working in a space that we're not really true experts. I feel like providing service that we're not an expert in is sort of disingenuous and not fair.
Is your company so you mentioned you have a team that's embedded in this given company. Is that a normal practice for you to actually put your people on the ground at these businesses, or is it primarily what I'll loosely call virtual?
So we have 3 or 4 clients now that we have embedded teams. And when I first built BGI or dreamt up the idea and started the company back in 2014, I never had a vision of having embedded teams. I pictured growing a company of consultants that worked for multiple clients, and you hire more consultants as you get more clients, and then you hire more consultants, and you go from there. What has happened, though, is as you grow your client base and you prove yourself, then you're developing relationships with people internally at those companies. Then you're going to learn about needs that they may have or other vendor contractor groups that are existing. So what happened was, in one case, they were already using another vendor that was providing these 15 or 18 employees doing facility operations tasks and duties. And they said, listen, we know you have a background in facilities and real estate. Why don't you compete for this contract? Why don't you put your hat in the ring and go with this contract? And so, we ended up doing it and being selected, and now we've done it for 3.5 years for that same client. And that's happened. Other sort of versions of that have happened. So we have sort of stumbled onto the embedded team role simply because we're in the door, we've developed relationships, we know people, they know our work, and then they come to us and say, we think you can do better than our current vendor. Are you willing to? Are you interested?
What impact did COVID have on your company?
We had some short-term stress. The first sort of 60 to 90 days when COVID really became clear of the magnitude of the pandemic. As a business owner, like many others around the country and around the world, I was pretty stressed and where things were going. We were on the verge of signing about 4 new deals, and one of the deals was with a large university system that it would have been at that time our largest single project in our history. And that, of course, all evaporated when all this hit and everyone was, going into quarantine and all that. So we had some short-term, hits for sure. But we benefited from the fact that many of our clients are big, behemoth, established large organizations. And that level of engagement with those types of clients gives you a degree of stability. Because when you're working, those large companies all did fine through the pandemic. And if we were working with a lot of small and medium-sized companies, they didn't do so well. But the large corporations did. So to go back to your original question, we actually performed really well in the year 2020 of COVID, and we're going to perform even better in 2021. And it has created some new business opportunity. in the sense of, there's more focus on continuity and resilience and safety, and since we're so situated in the entertainment industry and immersed in the entertainment industry, we've seen some growth because of COVID.
Are you venturing out beyond the entertainment industry, or are you primarily staying focused on clients that are in the entertainment industry?
We're doing our best to diversify. As much as I love our entertainment clients, and they have all been very valuable, great relationships for us, I don't really love being overly leveraged in a certain industry. And I think we're at something like 74 to 76% in the entertainment industry of our total client base, total revenue. I would much rather have that, more like 50% entertainment industry and 50 other. So we're doing our best to diversify, but since we don't have a sales team, we don't do outward business development, and we never really have. We do more, word of mouth, more sort of, oh, have you worked with them? Yeah, just word of mouth referral, which means when you have 72%, 76% entertainment industry, it means they're referring their friends in the entertainment industry. So we're getting more and more. So I'm not complaining, but I would love to be more diversified.
At this level of a corporation, how important is word of mouth advertising? Is it still, I don't want to undervalue it and say, oh, small businesses operate off word of mouth. Hey, my buddy's got a car repair business. Go get your car. But even at this level, is word of mouth still very important?
It's huge. Since we're an anomaly and that we have never had a salesperson, traditional sales, I should say, because obviously I do some sales in a sense, but in terms of having, 5 people on staff that like scour LinkedIn and go to municipal websites and look for RFPs and call people and send out color brochures, like we do none of that. That's what I mean by traditional sales. All of our stuff is word of mouth. All of our we maybe get 1 or 2 a year where they do a search of, consulting firms, online on Google. Bogaard Group pops up. They go to our website. Oh, this is what we want. I like their credentials. I like their biographies. This is great. I would say it's 1 or 2 a year at the most, maybe even less. We're really talking very low. All of our new business is based on, company X going to Y and saying, yeah, we've used BGI for the last 3.5 years, been really happy with them. Call this person, boom, and it goes from there. And like anything, it's sort of exponential, right? If you have 5 people talking to each other, that's helpful. But what if you have 25 people talking to all of their friends? Now that's 100 people they're talking to, right? Like
this is starting to sound like a shampoo commercial from about 30 years ago. So jumping in our time machine and going backwards to when you started the company. So you broke rule number 1 of any MBA program and not starting a business without doing a business plan. What other pitfalls or hurdles did you experience that if somebody's thinking about, hey, I want to make my transition, I want to do my own company, what were some of the hurdles or pitfalls that you encountered that they might benefit from trying to avoid?
Yeah, a really good question. And I give a much more intelligent answer now that I'm almost 8 years in, right? If this were 18 months, I don't know if I'd have an intelligent answer for you. I'd say in retrospect, a couple things. First of all, doing a business plan, although it wasn't written, I had largely written one and I had a very clear and specific path, albeit it was just in my head. It should be on paper, for sure.
Can I derail you just one quick second? Were you able to finance your company all on your own?
Yeah. In fact, because I had 2 clients on day 1 who both were willing to hire me specifically as a consultant for half time, I actually had a full schedule of work the day we incorporated as a company, because I had 2 major clients who said, we want to pay you half time. The other client said, we want to pay you half time. And so right out of the gate, and it goes back to my stress of 2 daughters in private school and all that, it sort of made things more comfortable because I knew I still had a comfortable salary right on day 1. It wasn't like I went 2.5 years without making any money or something like that.
But I would imagine that already having that revenue stream and not needing to go to outside funding almost negates the need per se to have a business plan.
In a way, yeah, because I wasn't asking anyone for money. I didn't need any upstart capital. I didn't have an office in both of these. In the case of both of the clients, my first two clients, I had offices at both of those sites. So I was just driving back and forth from Glendale to Los Angeles to Santa Monica, Glendale, Santa Monica, Glendale, Santa Monica. And I had an office and a desk at each location. And frankly, I was spoiled because both of them had free meals and easy parking, and I had a desk at each one, and I had a cell phone from each one. So, I had almost zero business expenses to get it off the ground. Now that's an anomaly. I just was lucky, and things fit together. And one was a video game company, one was a movie company, and it just worked out. And so I didn't need investment money. So you're 100% right. If I were going to someone to say I need 200 grand, I need 50 grand, I need 20 grand, I would need a plan. No one's going to give you money without that.
What time commitment did that put on you on a weekly basis, servicing two companies by yourself?
Yeah, it was nuts. And I think, and this was where my head was going to your earlier question of sort of what are lessons learned, or what could people learn.
We can get back to that since I derailed you.
Well, no, and it's perfect because this is where my head was going anyway with my next response. It's to that point of sort of bandwidth and hours that you're committing yourself. Had I known, back in 2013, 2014, when I was putting this together and negotiating contracts with those two companies, if I could go back in time and someone like you or someone I trust sat down with me and said, do you know that like over the next 6 or 7 years, you're going to work like 75-hour, 70-hour work weeks, incessantly, week after week after week after week. And it's going to take you about 7 or 8 years to really get this company to the point where you have a stable management staff, you have good leadership under you, you're sleeping well at night because people are taking care of your clients, you're not at risk of failing, like all these things that keep CEOs up at night. If someone had told me all that and said, but you're going to have to work 75-hour work weeks for the next 7 years, I don't know if I would have done it. So
sometimes ignorance is bliss.
Absolutely. And I'm super happy no one ever told me that, or if they did, I didn't listen. Because it was a big commitment. Now, I would, in fairness, some of that was I was a full-time dad. I was a husband. I was a dad. I was a student. So some of my busy long work weeks, there were other factors, but I think that the message, the takeaway from our conversation is that if you're going to launch your own firm, you have to be very, very realistic and very self-aware that it is a major sacrifice. And I'm not saying it's not fulfilling. I'm not saying it's not rewarding. And I'm thrilled that we're here today and I'm talking about it in our amazing office in Hollywood. But it takes a lot of work to get there. And it's and you have to have a supportive network, you have to have a supportive family, all those sorts of things. But that was one of the biggest takeaways that over the last couple of years that have struck me. Like, I can't believe I was working in that unhealthy amount of hours. And I know a lot of people work a lot. I'm not implying that people don't work long hours. People do all the time. I'm not abnormal. I don't have any crazy additional talent than anyone else. But the amount of time that I put in and the fatigue and the stress was pretty significant,
And somebody going into that has to know that it's going to be more than, like you said earlier, you're not going to be punching out at 5 o'clock every day. It's when you cross over that bridge of being the business owner, your business is 24/7. And obviously that initial kickoff is probably going to be the most hectic. Maybe it never gets unhectic, but having that commitment and the tenacity to see it through is the only way it's probably going to succeed.
That's right. And the term, I don't remember who gave me this term. I can't claim credit for it, but I have used it many times in discussions like this. Every morning I woke up with a healthy paranoia. And it's sort of a misnomer, of course, but meaning I knew that if I didn't get up at 5 a.m. and get to the gym, get myself going, get my coffee, get to work, no one else is going to do it for me. When you go work at a big corporation or a big government agency, whether you come to work or don't come to work, the place is going to continue to move forward. When it's a company of 2 or 4 or 6, and for many years we were 2 or 4 or 6, we haven't always been at 75. So every morning I woke up hungry, ready to roll, because no one else was going to save my company from failure. And so I had to get up and get it done every single day. And that was enough of a motivator and enough of a drive for me. It's like, well, it's me. There's no one else here. And, and so that was that sort of healthy paranoia was actually, I think, in a sense, it was what drove me, because I knew if it wasn't me, we weren't going to make it.
Well, and you've also stepped into, for no other terms, a different box. Every job you've had previously, your responsibility was to your family. Now that you have your own company, you not only still have that responsibility to your family, you now have employees who need to feel safe, feel confident that your company is going to be here tomorrow.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. And I put a lot of extra thought and care into decisions we make, because I know that a lot of people are wondering, what's the future of BGI? Are they going to be around in 2 years, in 5 years, in 25 years? What does my career growth look like? And for sure. And we're not running around with tons of like high paid executives. We have a lot of hourly employees. We have a lot of entry level employees that are just building their career, that are just in their first job. It's really critical that we do well and that we perform well, that we continue to grow, and that we create stability and, like you said, a safe space for them so that they're committed. Because if they don't feel safe, they're not going to be committed to my company. And if they're leaving the company, we have to replace them, and,
right.
Et cetera, et cetera.
So circling way back around to the interviewing process, the hiring process, you're now in the position of a company owner and being the one to hire people. What are you looking for? Is there anything you would expand on from what you mentioned previously as to what somebody needs to show you coming in the door, especially if they're former military or law enforcement?
Yeah, because of the nature of the work we do, we have a few roles for sure that are highly specialized, and there's A, B, C, D things or certifications that they must have, otherwise we can't chat. Like I need these. But those are, a smaller percentage. The great majority of the roles at BGI, a lot of them can be trained on the job. A lot of them, people can grow into roles. They can come in as an intern or as a part-timer, then they can move to an intern, then they can get promoted to a, contractor, then they could have a full-time role. And then they, there's these really flexible and mobile paths upward. Because a lot of what we do doesn't require this really elaborate set of technical skills. So then the next sort of logical question is, well, then what are you hiring for? Then what do you need? How do you hire? We're hiring to personality and potential. I see resumes that are 4 pages long. I don't even want to meet the person, or after I meet the person, I don't want to talk to them anymore. They're not a fit for our company. I have other resumes that are much shorter, but I meet the person and I'm wowed. Like, oh my gosh, this is an amazing human. They are wildly talented, amazing communicator, great potential. Yeah, they're 23. Yeah, they're 21. Yeah, they're 26. And they have X number of, or lack of experience, don't have much experience. But I see potential. I see strong personalities. I see a high degree of self-awareness. I see an emphasis, a focus on growth, a focus on, I see a high level of maturity, all those sorts of things. So I think it comes down to this, a lot of companies, they create a job description, they look at your resume, they see if you fit, and they decide if they hire you. We're much, much different. A lot of times we meet people without a job description. And when they try to give me 4 different versions of their resume and cover letters in glossy paper and all that, I'm not really that interested in that. I just want to sit down and talk with them to learn what they're about. I want to see how they think and how they operate, because that's how they're going to communicate with my clients. is how they communicate with me. So we are less concerned about resume and more concerned about personality and fit.
Are you willing to, if somebody wants to reach out to you for any advice or guidance, can they contact you?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, sometimes depending on what their background is, in some cases I may, fan them off to, one of my department heads who's really good in a particular area, or, one of my lead consultants is a former Marine. So someone may come to me who used to be in the Marine Corps. I'd say, you know what, you should probably meet with Carlos. I think you'd have a lot in common with Carlos. Why don't you guys chat, and talk a little bit about career? Or, oh, I lived overseas, and I did, oh, why don't you meet with Lisa? Like, Lisa lived overseas for a number of years, and, I think you guys might have a good connection. So I may identify something like that, but the simple answer is, yeah, we're absolutely available.
Should they come in a suit and tie when they come for their interview?
Generally not. Yeah, generally not. Although I'm a little old-fashioned, probably. I don't think this takes away from my earlier answer, but I tend to like people that dress nice and look very professional in their presentation, because again, that's how I think they're going to present to the client. But yeah, we don't have too many jobs where we expect a tie.
I appreciate your time. Anything else that you would like to add that maybe we didn't cover before we wrap this up?
Yeah, well, thank you for your time, Paul. It's always great to chat. I don't know if I have, a ton more. We've sort of covered and exhausted lots of really, really interesting topics. I think, I might just close with, the transition from the government over to the private side is it's a big step, no matter what, whether you have 5 years on or 35 years on, and whether you're coming from the FBI or a local sheriff's department or whatever it may be. It's a big step in one's career. But I think the one thing that I think is really important for folks to remember is there are some really amazing jobs out there coming from law enforcement. And I remember working with folks, and I even said this to myself, so I'm sort of being hyper transparent here of my own weaknesses, where I thought, I don't know if I can, I had doubts in myself, like, what else can I do? And aren't they always just going to sort of assume that I'm just a cop or I just have these skills? And I had those doubts, like probably many of your listeners that are going to be scratching their heads saying, I don't know if I could do that. Well, I would say that if you're determined and you have a plan and you have a path and you're willing to work hard, there is another opportunity for you. There are opportunities for growth. There is a private sector career for you that's fulfilling and, with good benefits and good salary and all those things that you would look for in a new job. And I would urge people to not rule it out and don't be hesitant. And it's paid off well for me, and I think it could pay off well for a lot of your listeners. So, have that confidence that there are other roles out there and they can make a good transition. And it's good for all of us to have really, really solid law enforcement folks in the private sector for a long list of reasons.
Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, always good to be here. Thanks, Paul.
Yep.